Now this might sound like something straight out of a Hollywood movie, but what you're about to hear is the real, meticulously planned, and as it turns out, fatally flawed story of a heist so huge, so audacious, it was immediately called the crime of the century, the Great Train Robbery of 1963. Okay, so just imagine this. It's the middle of the night, you're a train driver, and you're making a run you've done 100 times before through the dark English countryside. Then, up ahead, a red signal appears where there should absolutely be a green one. So you stop, right? Just like you're trained to, but in that sudden silence, you get this feeling that something is very, very wrong.
So that mysterious red light, yeah, it wasn't a malfunction. It was actually the first move in a criminal master plan. It was the exact moment the fuse was lit on a scheme that had been months in the making.
See, this wasn't just any old passenger train. This was basically a moving post office, and it was carrying an absolute fortune in cash. The driver, a 58-year-old guy named Jack Mills, he knew that signal should be green, so he was immediately suspicious. But before he could even really figure out what was happening, his whole world just exploded into chaos. And bam! The gang moved in with almost military precision. The trackside telephone line, the driver's only connection to the outside world, was dead. Cut. When the assistant driver climbed out to go investigate, he was immediately snatched up. And then, the whole gang just swarmed the engine cab. Jack Mills actually tried to fight back, and for his trouble, he was brutally hit over the head with an iron bar. So you might be wondering, how does a gang of criminals know exactly where and when to strike like this? Well, it wasn't luck. This was a perfectly executed plan, and it was built on two crucial pieces of top-secret inside information. The leader of this whole operation, a man named Bruce Reynolds, he had an ace up his sleeve, an anonymous source. This person is believed to have been a senior security official inside the Royal Mail. This informant, whose identity is still a mystery, basically handed them the keys to the kingdom. So the first tip? It was an absolute game changer. The gang knew that the high-value packages coach, you know, the one with all the money, was supposed to be a modern one, fully kitted out with alarms. But their insider told them that on this specific night, it had been swapped for an old reserve coach, M3024M, which had no security system at all. The vault was literally a sitting duck. But you know what? The second tip was maybe even more critical. Because of a recent bank holiday weekend up in Scotland, the train wasn't carrying its usual load of around 300,000 pounds. Oh no. It was carrying nearly 3 million pounds. That's 10 times the normal amount. The gang knew they weren't just hitting a train, they were hitting the absolute jackpot.
Alright, so with that inside knowledge locked down, the train stopped and the crew neutralized, the robbery itself could finally begin.
The gang detached the engine and the two carriages they were after. But then, a problem. Their own hired train driver totally panicked. He'd never operated an engine this modern. So in a really cruel twist, they dragged the injured Jack Mills, still bleeding from his head, and forced him to drive the train about 1 kilometer down the track to a bridge where their truck was waiting. From there, they stormed the carriage, overwhelmed the staff, and formed a human chain to start unloading all that cash. So how much did they actually get away with? The final tally was a staggering 2.6 million pounds. I mean, that was an almost unimaginable amount of money at the time. To put it in perspective, in today's money, that's nearly 67 million pounds, or well over 80 million US dollars. And the scale of this is just mind-boggling. We're talking 2.5 tons of cash. They hauled 120 heavy mail bags down to their truck. And here's the kicker, they did all of this in just 15 minutes. It was an incredible operation of speed and just pure brute force. As they left, one of the robbers turned to the terrified postal workers they had tied up, and he said this, "Don't move for 30 minutes or you'll be killed." It was a single menacing sentence meant to buy them a little extra time. They had absolutely no idea it was the one thing that would bring their entire operation crashing down. So, the gang thinks they've pulled off the perfect crime, right? Well, not exactly. That one chilling warning, that single sentence, it contained a fatal clue that was about to unravel everything. The robbers made it to their hideout, a remote farmhouse about 43 kilometers from the scene. They were ecstatic. They divided up the loot, and then, in a move that's become legendary, they started a game of Monopoly, using the actual stolen banknotes. I mean, they felt completely untouchable. But here's where it all starts to go wrong. While they're playing their game, they're listening to a police scanner. and their celebration suddenly turns to ice-cold dread. They hear the police discussing the case, and they hear the investigators using their own 30-minute warning to calculate exactly how far they could have traveled from the crime scene.
The police basically drew a search radius of about 50 kilometers or 30 miles from the bridge, and suddenly the gang's remote, safe farmhouse was smack dab in the middle of the hot zone. Their plan to lay low for a few days totally shattered. They had to get out, and they had to get out right now.
So this sudden panic, this need to flee immediately, it just triggered this cascade of errors. Their hasty escape left a trail of breadcrumbs that led the police right to their door.
In a total rush, they tried to wipe down the farmhouse for fingerprints and paid a local guy a big chunk of cash to burn the entire place to the ground after they were gone. Well, the man took their money and then did absolutely nothing. The hideout and all the evidence inside was left perfectly preserved for the police.
And sure enough, after a neighbor called in a tip about suspicious activity, investigators raided the farm. And they found everything: empty mailbags, supplies, even the getaway truck that had been hastily repainted. But the real smoking gun, the thing they had completely missed in their frantic cleanup, the Monopoly board. It was covered in their fingerprints, and since most of them already had criminal records, it was just a matter of time.
In the end, most of the gang was rounded up. 14 of the 16 members were caught and handed sentences of 30 years in prison. But the story doesn't really end there. For the train driver, Jack Mills, the robbery was a life sentence. His injuries meant he could never work again, and he never really recovered from the trauma. He died just 7 years later.
The crime was solved, the money was mostly recovered, and the bridge where it all happened is now unofficially known as Train Robbers Bridge. But even after all these decades of investigations and speculation, the identity of the most important person in this whole scheme, the inside source, the one they called the Ulster, was never discovered. He was the ghost in the machine who set this entire thing in motion and then just vanished.